kick it off. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, my standard greeting. So we've got people from all over the world. I'm Joy Heath Rush, and I'm the CEO of ILTA. And I have been in the legal tech biz. This is year 40 for me. I started in 1981. There was tech then. I know that's hard to believe, but there was legal tech. And one of the many things that's been of interest to me always in my career is security, but it's certainly something that's intensely interesting to ILTA. And it's one of the areas of technology, sometimes there's a lot of secret sauce around technology. People see technology as a competitive advantage. Security is one of those areas where the more we cooperate, the better we all are. We're only as strong as the weakest link in our security chain. And so the more we share about security and help each other become more secure, the better off we are. As all of us know, one of the problems we've been trying to solve for a number of years now is to manage this kind of explosion of security questionnaires. The one people used to talk about all the time and kind of twitch and quake when they talked about it was the Bank of America security questionnaire. That was one of the first ones that you started seeing all the time, and how detailed it was. And it was, I can remember the security questionnaires passing by my desk, and I had to fill out my part about the stuff I was doing. And it was a bunch of people's part-time job. There are now big firms that have 4, 5, 6 people that basically do nothing but fill out security questionnaires all the time, or it's significant. One of the things we'd all love to see, I think, is a way to take that burden off. And one of the ideas that's been kicked around in the industry for a few years is something similar to the universal college application. That is, there's a certain baseline of information that all the colleges share, and then each college has its own bespoke piece. And this is something that ACC really took on, is to try to help manage that security audit process that happens between corporate law departments and law firms. And so when the Data Steward Standard was announced by the ACC, what, about 10 weeks ago, Jim? Does that sound right? 12?
That's right.
Yeah,
Right.
something like that.
In November.
We immediately reached out and said, look, this is very interesting to our members. They're going to, they may need to participate in this. They're going to have clients ask them about it. So can we talk? And Jim and I had a conversation. Then Jim came and spoke with ILTA's Legal Sec Steering Committee, and did a presentation for them. And we thought there was value in having more conversation about it. So I reached out to my G100 advisory committee and said, are you interested in this? And they said, absolutely. So I asked Jim to come in and talk to us. And again, I know we have a few more people going to join. They'll come in and out, but we'll also have the recording. So I've given my introduction, and Jim, let me turn it over to you to introduce yourself and the members of the ACC team. And then I'll let you take it over.
Joy, thank you. And thanks for inviting me back. You had a chance to decline. I appreciate that. And hello, everyone. I'm Jim Merklinger. I'm with the Association Corporate Counsel. I'm president of the ACC Credentialing Institute, which is a subsidiary of ACC. I've actually been with ACC for over 20 years. I was previously its general counsel, and before I was asked to come into the role of managing the Credentialing Institute. And that is an organization that's responsible for developing the standards that we'll talk to you about today, as well as other training. There's a certification program for in-house counsel. That's not relevant to it, but it relates to the organization itself as working in the area of standards and training. Before I go on, I do want to point out two of my colleagues, Bill and Janae, are on the call, and I was asked if they could just briefly introduce themselves. Janae, if you don't mind.
Oh, not at all. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Joy, I'm going to borrow that from you from now on. I've actually been in the technology business longer than Joy. So I started working in technology in 1978 for IBM, and I am working exclusively on helping do business development for the Data Steward program that we're going to talk about today.
And then my colleague, Bill.
Bill Schiefelbein, a little less than Joy, about 34 years in the legal technology area. I got my law degree in Michigan, practiced for a very short while, software product manager at West Publishing, now Thomson Reuters. 10 years as a CIO at Dorsey & Whitney, Williams & Connolly, some time, about 4 years at the Howry firm as the managing director of electronic discovery. And then when that imploded, you know, you do what you do. I'm a consultant now. So.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And I'm going to share the screen right now. And again, as Joy mentioned in the very beginning, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. I'd rather address them than you wait or lose interest. It's important that we get the feedback from particularly the law firm perspective. And one thing I just want to highlight, if you're not familiar with ACC, the Association Corporate Counsel, it's a voluntary bar association, and all of our members are lawyers who work in corporate legal departments. It's a global organization. We have members in over 85 different countries, and you'll see from the slide, we have over 45,000 lawyers who work in over 10,000 different corporations around the world. And I was asked at the request of our board of directors to look at developing this accreditation program. One was that the chair at the time, Simon Fish, was the chief legal officer of Bank of Montreal. He's very familiar with evaluating security practices of their law firms. He also felt it was an annoying necessity that they must do. So from his perspective, even though they were doing this type of evaluation far longer than other members of the board, he thought if there was a standard that be recognized, even if it just eliminated some of the work they had to do, there'd be a lot of value in it. We also recognized that there are many organizations that weren't doing this. And then among even our members, many weren't even sure what they were doing. So that led to working on developing this program. Now, my background as the lawyer for the organization is not in data security, although some privacy issues are part of my responsibilities. We worked with Control. It was the sponsor of ACC's network, the Information Governance Network, to have them serve as the program administrator. So they're more behind the scenes. So if you see references to Control, they're the ones that administer, make sure the site's working, the technology is working behind it, the independent third parties that do the assessments are lined up to do that job, and I'll explain more about that in a second. The thing that we noticed right away was that a lot of our members didn't have a way of assessing their law firms or legal service providers, so there was a need for that. And one thing that we saw, that even though there were different issues underway, they weren't being driven by the client. And so our board recognized and thought, look, if there's one thing we can do as an organization, ACC could help develop a standard that could be recognized, and at the same time, take it upon ourselves to educate our own members as to how it works and develop a service that would save them time. Joy, I think you mentioned earlier that some of the firms have full-time staff dedicated to filling out questionnaires. And we also found that as we were doing the research on the viability of doing such a program, many law firms had shared that with us and said that, look, if you could get something that's recognized, that would make life a lot easier for us too. So there was interest initially from the law firms as well as from the in-house perspective. So it led to developing this system, which was designed to obviously identify a set of standards that would work to a broad group of law firms. The important part too is that it was designed so that we wouldn't inadvertently preclude someone from participating in seeking accreditation. It's done with the thought that it's not something only a large law firm can meet or a small one. Even the advisory group itself included very large global law firm perspectives, as well as very small firms and experts in the field. The in-house perspective, we had an advisory group of in-house counsel, some with a lot of experience working in this area and some with none. The important part is that the program had to make sense to everyone. And so if you've dealt with those type of committees or worked on that, you know, there's a lot of work that goes in that. And Bill worked a lot on developing and organizing those groups and getting to the standards that we have today.
Jim, one comment I'd like to make here, just because I think it's good for everybody to have it on the record. One of the other pain points for law firms was that a lot of the security audit or questionnaires that came from corporate law departments were from a kind of a general procurement function and applied to procuring pens and paper and copiers and
Yes.
all kinds of things that didn't necessarily make very much sense for the procurement of legal services. So there was a lot of time being spent on stuff that maybe was not that relevant. And then even people inside the law departments didn't necessarily know what to do with the data that they got. So the desire to have a questionnaire that was more tailored to the specific risks associated with the procurement and delivery of legal services, I think has been a big uh, wish list item as we've moved down this path. Yeah.
And that was driving this advisory group, and Bill worked a lot on shaping that, because just as you said, we heard a lot of people express concern of, they're answering a lot of questions with non-applicable, and they're answering correctly. It's just that, as you said, it wasn't intended for the practice of law. And so when we looked at developing the controls that are used in this assessment, the idea was look at and make sure that they match up to the reality of how law firms operate and legal service providers, and how they protect that sensitive information of their clients. And that was really important, to make sure they get that buyback. And you mentioned in the beginning, and I appreciate that, is that it's an evolving process, right? It's not, these are Jim Merklinger standards and they'll stay this way forever. We realize that it's changing technology all the time. And it's important to get that feedback. And again, we start out with a broad perspective, many different perspectives, I should say, and we'll continue to do that, and we'll hopefully solicit some of that help from your organization. When I was asked if Janae could address the next slide here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the working committees, as Jim mentioned, spent a lot of time trying to put something together that would work specifically for the law firms. The idea was that the ACC, played the role of sponsor, but the concept is that this be something that was created by the industry for the industry, and those working committees will continue to meet, as you said, to maintain and update the standard as things change or as new ideas come into play. Now, the idea is not to create yet another set of, unique proprietary controls. It, just creates more of the problem, but instead to leverage the existing industry standards, but to pick out the pieces that are relevant to the practice of law, and to optimize both how the questions are asked and the potential answers to those questions to make it a more productive experience and make it easier for in-house and law firms to communicate with one another about exactly what the status is. So the way they did that was to look at the industry standards. Actually, the Nist framework was used as the final baseline for the standards, because the commercial language in it was easy for in-house to and the law firms to share an understanding. And also, most of the controls in that standard are more action oriented and binary. You're either doing something or you're not, as opposed to making progress against something. So wherever possible, Nist became the starting point. And then where the control was not available in the Nist cybersecurity framework, they drew upon other global standards to fill in what were perceived as the gaps. And that included from places like ISO, COBIT, CIS, CSC, and ISA 95. Jim, can we move the slide? Okay. So with that in mind, with the controls in mind that the committee had settled on, then the idea is, how do we share this with everyone in a way that gives the best communication path between in-house and the law firm, and also is productive for everyone. So we built the program into an online cloud software as a service system. And an in-house counsel can encourage a law firm to participate and do the self-assessment, or law firms actually are deciding to do this on their own. You conduct the self-assessment in our what we call the DSP Exchange. It's our software as a service platform. Now, unlike many of the questionnaires with a lot of open-ended text field fill-it-in questions, such as are you holding any private data? Please name, please list. Instead, the Data Steward program offers answers prepackaged, which represent the most common status that a law firm would have against that control. So to use a very simple-minded example, security passwords. So you might say, is your online system secured? One answer might be yes, we use passwords to protect access. A second better answer might be we use two-factor authentication. A third answer might be we use multi-factor authentication with a biometric indicator. Each of those answers is given a set of points. And so across the 160 controls that the core assessment looks at, we can develop a best practice score by simply having the best answer to each of those questions. And by the way, we cover 160 controls in 40 questions, each of which has 4 different answers. You can, by picking the best answer to each question, you can develop a best practice score. And then as you as a law firm go through it and assess yourself, you can then benchmark automatically your current state against the perceived industry best practice. So you go through and you basically fill out the 40 questions, the 160 controls, and then you can decide if you want to just use the resulting information internally for internal planning, or you can decide to share it with one or many clients. Not only are you the only one who gets to decide who it gets shared with, but there's also different levels at which you can share the information. You can simply share with someone that you're participating in the program. You can share just the final score that you got, the sort of summary of all of the answers. You can select information out of the assessment and build a PDF very easily out of that and share that. That might be appropriate, for example, with a potential new client who's asking about a specific area of security, or you can share your dashboard. And our participants so far are mostly choosing to share dashboards with their existing clients. The dashboard, which I'll show you in a minute, contains not only the score, but a really quick summary of your status on each of the different control areas. Now, one of the things that makes this different from doing the annual surveys that we all hate is that your access to the system is continuous. And so as you work on projects throughout the year and change your state in a particular control area, you can update that status in the system. It will automatically change the final score, and you can choose if you want to share that with clients and say, hey, we've updated in this area. So that's kind of the basic underpinnings of how the system works. Before I move on, any questions?
Do you have an API?
Bill, can I ask you to answer that question?
Yeah, you're probably asking, do we have an API into some like a GRC platform or something? We get that now and then. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, so we can push our responses in automatically, so we don't have to sit and circle back constantly.
Yeah, the way, so I can talk about a little in detail later, but basically this is built on an audit board platform, which is probably the most robust, I'd call it GRC or compliance assurance platform out there. So actually that capability is built in. You could export your responses and so on various topics if you wanted to, but it also automatically shows up in another side of the software where after you've responded to the assessment, you can go over, look at all the controls in this core assessment and actually just conduct remediation project management right there, upload evidence to support, your response on a particular control. If it needs work, you can assign a remediation owner within your team to go work on it. You can give them a deadline. You can have some workflow on approvals. So that's actually an under-mentioned aspect of the program, but it's very robust. But you could export those responses as well if you wanted to get them over to some other platform.
Okay.
Terrific. So this is an example of one of our controls. This happens to be the data at rest control. And as I mentioned, there are 4 answers, and you can see that they are at varying levels of strictness associated with the control. You can, actually in this case, they describe different aspects of data at rest. And so you simply identify whether you meet 0 of 4, 1 of 4, 2 of 4, etc. of these requirements. And as I said, each of those answers has a point score associated with it. So 0 of 4 requirements, for example, would get a 0 points for this answer. You'll notice that not applicable is an available response. We allow not applicable as a response to every single control. And when you say not applicable, it does not impact your score either for the better or for the worse. We simply take it out of both the numerator and the denominator when we calculate the final score, because obviously there are times where a control just may not be relevant to the kind of law that you're working on with a particular client. For example, if all you're doing is writing contracts for them and you're not holding any of their data over time, data at rest would be obviously much less important. You'll also notice that for every control, the committee established a minimum threshold for ACC accreditation. We'll talk about accreditation in a moment. It's an optional next step after you finish the self-assessment. Also notice that in the case of every control, the control is outlined by the category and the subcategory as defined in the Nist standard. And then we also, for each one, show the references to all the other standards that were considered and from which concepts were drawn to create this control. As I mentioned, there are 160 controls in what's in production right now. This is the core assessment. And as Jim mentioned early on, the goal of the core assessment is to create a baseline standard for all law firms, both large and small. Now, there's a recognition that obviously in some areas of the law and some verticals, such as financial services, healthcare, HIPAA areas particularly, there's a need for advanced standards as well. Those are being currently planned for work by the committee in an advanced assessment. And that's an area where honestly, we'd very much like to have some input from this group. Once the self-assessments are done, as I said earlier, you can use it yourself simply for your own purposes to identify perhaps, what priorities you want to invest in projects this year. You can use it with clients, and they, as Bill mentioned, there is an aspect of the system that makes it very easy to do digital verification of the responses, making your client audits a lot easier. Or you can move on to ACC accreditation, which is an option that, again, I'll talk about in just a moment. Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Janae. Bill, you touched on it briefly earlier, but can you go a little bit more into the platform that we're using?
Do you mind going back to the controls? I just want to kind of clarify a couple of things because I know that's important to this crowd.
Sure,
go back,
of course.
one side.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to clarify that the way we organized this, we had a controls committee that worked on the controls. They reported those to a working group. We had CIOs, CISOs, and those things, large firms, small firms, a couple of vendors who've been through FedRAMP. So pretty sophisticated people, but obviously we're looking to expand. And we developed basically an algorithm for doing this. We did not want this to be the ACC's kind of own roll your own controls. And so what we chose on the left-hand side, what you're seeing is actually the Nist cybersecurity framework, which is the public facing, not the government facing, the public facing. And it's really just an organizational scheme. They don't actually have controls built in. They've just got these categories and then subcategories. And so for data at rest, then they reference all these other controls from various frameworks. And our approach was to default first to the Nist 853 controls, and you can see some of the controls listed there, because we wanted to make sure that two things: they don't copyright, so that allowed us to hew as closely to the language of the control as written by the framework, as opposed to making up our own. But secondly, as Joy mentioned earlier, we did some in the selection of the controls and in I would call it light editing if it was really confusing, or we have some of those situations where it's completely irrelevant. We would do some light editing and smoothing, mainly in order to make every single one of these. We did not want open-ended questions. We wanted every one of them to be basically I comply or I don't comply, kind of a binary choice. So that's a little color on how we developed the controls. So just wanted you to have that. And we would, if Nist 853 didn't cover something, we would next move to ISO 27001. And generally between the two, we'd cover it. There was like 3 exceptions where we had to go even further afield to find something. Okay, Jim, I'm sorry. Yeah, and so the platform that we've built this into is, I mentioned it earlier, Audit Board. Don't want to go into too much detail, but basically it's in the GRC space, specifically addresses internal audit departments at corporations. And, so it can be used for SOX compliance or risk management, or, however you want to skin the cat. There's multiple modules. Basically had all the different feature sets that we needed in it, whether it was a questionnaire survey capability, dashboarding in Power BI, or as I mentioned earlier, some actually very robust compliance assurance, I'd call it, about compliance assurance capabilities, which we'll cover in another slide. But it is clearly the leader in their space. It's secure, it's robust, web-based, et cetera. So it's we're pretty happy with that. I think, Jim, did you want? Yeah, the next one. This is just our PowerPoint rendering of the dashboard. But the key thing to note is that depending on how you responded to the questions, whether you comply or don't comply with a particular control, you'll see on the right-hand side, what are the number of controls met, what's the total possible for that particular control, and what's the ACC threshold, which is not always you have to have a perfect answer. In many cases, like in case of information security policy, you'd get a 4 if you mandated compliance with all the controls in the policy. However, most firms won't do that because that itself is a risk. But so an answer would get a 3 if you addressed all of the controls, but not necessarily mandated. So that's an example where ACC accreditation would be a little lighter than a 4. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, all of this rolls up into a percentage score. So there's something like 159 possible answers. And if you had 159, you'd have 100%. I'll show you, if we have a little time for a demo, in the upper right, you can actually, as large firms, you can actually, you can basically clone your questionnaire so that you could have one for your US offices, one for your EU offices, one for APAC, whatever. There's the ability to create separate questionnaires for separate areas, jurisdictions, matters, whatever matter types, if you need to show strength and weaknesses, instead of merging all of those locations or whatever into the same into the same survey. Then it's going to kind of dilute your the percentage of your responses. And we do 2 things up front that are really important to the clients. We ask you to define the scope. You still control what you put in there, but in the survey, whatever you put in for scope will show here, so they know that a more precise idea of the scope of your responses. And then the second thing is issues and exceptions. This would be where you don't necessarily comply, or you feel like maybe there's an issue with how you comply. You can be as explicit as your client's request or as inexplicit as you like. But we put those up front because they're very important to the clients, and it is something to highlight. That's basically it for the dashboard. And obviously, you ask questions along the way if you want.
Yeah. Bill, thank you for that. One thing I also want to highlight that from the client's perspective, we've been asked multiple times now, and it'd be important for you to know, is that within the system, a client can add their own questions that are specific to that organization, and it can be captured in. It doesn't affect the score, but there's ability to do more than just what's there. And Bill mentioned several times, it's a very robust system.
That's actually in the compliance assurance area, which I'll cover in a minute. Yeah, because that's important to many of the firms and the client. As far as the survey goes, though, we want to make sure we lock this, the questionnaire is locked in, and this is the dashboard of the results of the questionnaire. That is the core assessment questions that the committees have decided on, committees have approved. Additional, as Janae mentioned, additional questions in an advanced assessment is our next project that we're working on, and again, would love your help and improvement on that. but and then the customization aspect is in a different section that where a firm can do its own compliance assurance, I guess, how I'd word it.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And then, Jenny, I think you wanted to cover some of the ongoing compliance management.
Want me to take that today, or are you on mute?
I think Janae's on mute right now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I somehow got muted and then couldn't find the mute button. I know that never happens to anyone else on Zoom. Yes, as Bill mentioned, there's a whole nother side of the system that offers a very robust set of functionality for compliance management. And so after you finish the self-assessment, you can move into this compliance side and basically having identified, assessed the risks, and in the audit board lingo, risks are essentially areas in the controls where you'd like to be doing better. You can then set up for each of those questions in the assessment. You can upload documentation for your own use or to be shared with clients. And you can also build action plans around each of the controls. You can assign a task owner or task owners. There's a whole workflow to this around your action plans. And there, by the way, those workflows, if you want to use them, are built in so that you don't have to build your workflows from scratch. And basically then the system tracks the progress against the action plan and gives you instant visibility into progress that the people are making that you've assigned the tasks to, with automated follow-up. So it allows you to centralize your evidence, your documentation, and your review comments. One of the things that really honestly surprised us is a couple of the first firms that signed up to use the Data Steward program were firms that were ISO certified. And we were surprised by that because we thought firms that were ISO certified would have this whole thing covered. They laughed when we said that and assured us that despite the fact that they were had become ISO certified, clients were still asking them for questionnaires. And so the problem was that the documentation that they pulled together to achieve their ISO certification was not easy to share with clients. So when clients would ask about specific areas of security, someone still had to do the work of cutting and pasting and slicing and dicing and altering and putting it into the questionnaire. And so what they are both doing or have done at this point is they've taken their ISO documentation and they have organized it into this back end associated with each of the controls. And with the documentation being there with a control, it makes it then very easy if a client asks about a specific control to just cut that piece and clone it. The system, by the way, allows for the creation of a unique workspace by the law firm associated with each client. So if a client is doing an in-house audit and asks for information from the law firm, you simply clone a space and copy over the documentation and plans that are in your private workspace, the subset of what you want to share, into that client's workspace, and you share it with them. So it makes it very productive and very easy to respond to digitally to those kinds of requests. This is also, by the way, how ACC accreditation works. ACC accreditation uses an independent assessor who's been vetted by the ACC and who has committed to follow the defined process for ACC accreditation as in validating the self-assessment of a law firm. And the data gets cloned over and the assessor looks at all the information in the cloned workspace. So the ACC accreditation is performed 100% remotely over the course of 4 days work for the assessor and about a day's worth of direct interaction with you or your staff.
Janae, can I just jump in on two points on that? If we can go back. I just want to point out that these are 3 use cases. That first use case is totally internal to the firm. So that's where you do your own project management, action plans, whatever, to improve compliance against any of the controls that you select. And then in number 2, remote client audits, you can have as many, you'll obviously have a separate workspace for each client that is auditing you, where you would basically, they would be determining, do you comply or not comply based on the documents or evidence you uploaded. Both of those use cases, the law firm in number 1 and the client in number 2, as Jim was mentioning, can add their own custom controls. So it might be as simple as uploading an attestation, or it might be as complicated as saying, look, I've got 10 controls related to HIPAA that the client, want to make sure you comply with those, but they're not currently in our core assessment. And same thing in the law firm, you may have other things that you want to drive. It could be physical security that's not necessarily in our core assessment. And then the last one, obviously, the ACC accreditors do not add their own custom. That is all about assessing you against the core assessment controls as you responded in your survey, but all distinct areas, workspaces. So you might have 12 of these, 1 for you, 1 for the ACC accreditor, and 10 clients that are auditing you. Okay, sorry.
Janae, do you want to address, just again, you covered most of this, but the life cycle, and one of the things we highlight, and Bill was just touching on, is that, do this once, share with many.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. Thanks, Jim. So, I mean, this is just intended to be kind of our summary of what we're trying to achieve. I mean, at the core, our goal is to make custom questionnaires go away. But beyond that, the goal is just to make the whole process much more productive and allow you to respond once and share with many clients, as Jim said. Also allow for the better communication by providing more real-time updates and real-time client access. So you don't have this swarm of questionnaires coming once a year to respond to. There's no longer a need for annual questionnaire cycles. So the productivity of doing the survey the first time is, based on our experience so far, is really good. One of those ISO firms that I talked about, and I wouldn't represent this as the standard experience for everyone because they were exceptionally prepared, having just gone through their certification, but they finished everything they needed to do with the survey and putting in their documentation in less than 4 hours, and then they were done. And so it's very productive even the first time. But the real win in this is, the reuse of all those answers with additional clients. So that the time to do the second survey, even if someone had, a special thing they wanted to add of an attestation or something, becomes minimal. And, you can avoid all of the headaches of, the current spreadsheet hell.
So there have been other organizations that have tried to do something like this with the same kind of goal. I think every one of us is very interested in getting away from the individual custom spreadsheets from each client. But I guess the question is, and other organizations that have tried it have faced the challenge of kind of law firm clients not being interested in signing on to a single centralized standard. They really want their custom questionnaires completed all the time. So I guess the question is, you mentioned in the beginning that different law firms of different sizes were involved in the development of the questions and all that. Were any clients involved, and do we have any sense of the buy-in from law firm clients?
Jim, do you want to talk about the committee of in-house?
Sure. So part of this program was, there was 2 advisory groups. One, the law firm, and the other were the clients. We had in-house counsel participating in this. And I said some were involved in legal operations, others were the general counsel of their companies, different sizes, different industries, and that again, that is an ongoing group. We need that perspective. Part of what ACC looked at is that what you're pointing out is that there can be many different ways of collecting this data, many different standards, but ultimately, if the client is asking for it and driving it, then it has a higher rate of success as far as adoption. And I said, ACC, we don't represent all the corporations in the world, but we do have over 10,000. We have members on our board that have over 300 law firms on their panels that they use around the world globally. Some have many more than that, just those alone. So that was part of getting them on the same page. Part of that is ACC's responsibility, educating its members and getting that perspective. We have legal departments now going through this, are using it to evaluate actually replacing the current practices that they have,
Yeah.
because they see the value in having a system where they can easily access this information. Plus, it's driven by and multiple parties as far as the perspectives and updating and keeping the standards, so they don't have to, and assume, you know, they rely on it and accept these. We've gone through multiple exercises where we've taken the existing controls and mapped them to the controls that those companies were using, and each one of them found that they're actually better than what they had. I don't think that's a coincidence, because a lot of work went into making sure these were relevant. That was as part of what Bill was working on. So there's a lot of different groups and perspectives involved in here. And again, that's part of what drives the success. There's no guarantee anything ever works. We all know that. And again, that's why there's so many different options out there. But what we found from the people that were already doing this, that had responsibility in corporate legal departments, they didn't want to do it. They just had to. That's not what they're hired to do. That's just incidental to then getting their work done. And I think all you can appreciate that. They wanted to have an option just to say, yeah, these firms have met this standard. We know what the standard is, and ongoing, and then move on from there. And then, you know, the real work starts.
Yeah,
And
and
Jim,
if I can just add on, you know, as the person who's often talking with those in-house counsel departments, you know, as Jim mentioned, we have some very large corporations, surprisingly large corporations, working to put pilots together with panels of law firms, actually more than 800 firms globally. And, you know, they range from, we've got one of the largest high-tech firms in Silicon Valley, extremely large financial services credit card provider. You know, people really are interested in doing this another way. You know, as Jim mentioned, often this process is forced down on them by necessity. They pick up surveys from procurement or the supplier management department, and they don't feel like, you know, they're really getting anything out of it either. And so they're very eager to find a new way. Mostly when I speak with these corporations, they decide to participate in a couple of different ways. One of the most common is to offer this as an alternative to the existing process. There are some considering and working on plans to mandate it. And there are others who are intending to use it as a gating practice for the addition of new law firms. So, you know, we're getting a lot of traction, and I think it's because it's coming from the ACC. And, you know, there are actually some very good other efforts, as you said, that have worked on this in the past, and that in fact are working on it from a generic vendor perspective elsewhere in the industry. But what makes this different is that the you know, the in-house counsel themselves are participating in the definition of the standard, and it's their membership organization that's pushing it.
Yeah, and if I can relate this back to one of the statistics Jim showed earlier in the slides, roughly 30% of based on ACC's own research, roughly 30% of firms just basically for whatever reason, you know, really don't see a need to do this. But of the 70% that do, half, a little over half, don't do anything today. So that's about 40% of the population don't do anything today and need something and don't have resources or whatever to pull this together. And of the 30% who are doing something today, it's, as Jim and Janae were commenting, it's been surprising, but the majority, I would say the vast majority, really don't feel like they have the skill set or resources to pull it together. They don't want to. How do they evaluate the responses, especially when there's open-ended questions, et cetera? So they are looking for something that, as Joey mentioned, a little more customized and a little more straightforward for the legal industry.
And as many of you probably appreciate, a lot of the ACC members, they're lawyers, but they're not necessarily chief information officers. Sometimes they pretend to be one out of necessity, depending on their structure. And within ACC, we have 4,000 legal departments that are just sole practitioners. And so having a means, and many of them engage many law firms. So part of it is, you know, what does this mean, educating them on that. We do programs all the time with our chapters, our own membership, constantly educating them. These are all things that you would be familiar with, and obviously you could even teach. But our challenge is, again, from the in-house perspective, making sure they understand and there's a tool that they can easily use. And that was important. So a lot of time has been spent on the product itself, the DSP exchange we referred to, as well as making sure the controls and even mapping out and explaining what these controls are, which is something with many of your backgrounds you wouldn't necessarily need. But again, when someone says they're ISO certified, most people say, well, what does that mean? They know the standard, but again, what was certified? ISO certification means different things to different people. And that's part of the challenge that members have. They're not sure what questions they should be asking. And so again, that all goes into trying to create this standard, which I'm sure, other standards have too. But again, this is driven by the request by the clients, but in collaboration with the law firms providing representation. It needs to work for everyone. And so that's important. And that's also why we're very interested in working with ILTA.
Yeah, and also I guess I just want to highlight something that was said a moment ago, which is that many of these in-house counsel staff members and participants that I talk to are really seeking more information about how they can do this better. And so our standard is a piece of that solution, but there also, if there were a way for us to work together more broadly on educating people on, best practices and, what to do and what not to waste time on, I think there's an area of interest there that's, people are very interested in hearing those messages.
Janae, can you cover just the last part? Just people want to know what the costs are and different options that are involved in this program.
Yeah, before you guys go to the cost,
Sure.
if you don't mind, this is John. I
Sure.
appreciate the conversation here, learning a lot about your methodology. I oversee an AmLaw 50 firm, complex client base internationally, generally fall more often than not into highly sophisticated, highly regulated entities and industries that have an indiscriminate amount of funds to devote to cyber and risk to protect their business, have a very complex cyber risk apparatus that, frankly, this is their career. They enjoy this. This is what, they are making a difference. They are being impactful to the marketplace. And, all the events that have transpired from SolarWinds to Accellion to everything else reinforces why these professionals must exist in the marketplace. And what they vehemently push back on is any type of watering down of standards, evidence collection, another intermediary signing off and saying, here's our stamp of approval, this should be enough for you. They want very bespoke evaluations. And you're right, the sophisticated first tranche of law firms that went ISO very early on before it became Kleenex, it became kind of everyone had it. That only lasted so long for clients to accept it as something worthwhile. And the sophisticated clients once again pushed back and said, this is not sufficient. We're going to need to do the root canal because that's the only way we're going to get a true risk rating of you. So in a long-winded way, what I'm getting at is the only way this becomes valuable to, and mind you, ILTA is a very big tent. So you have small practitioner offices that have, regulatory requirements for savvy customers. You have mid-market, you have regional. I think you have something here that is worth connecting with ILTA on. There's no question about it. But selfishly, I'm also trying to figure out how this would work with an AmLaw 50 or a Global 50 type firm. And I think the piece that really would be sticky is if you got those GCs in well-known industries to commit to your exchange, to put their logos on your exchange to say, we accept this. And to your point earlier, it overrides our own internal risk security apparatus, which is extensive. Mm-hmm. If you got that, then I think AmLaw 50 would be delighted to pour more money into another platform because we have dozens of platforms trying to make it easier to manage the onslaught of risk review. Personally, and I didn't get a chance to see the beginning of this, but my risk program officer, we actually have one dedicated just for this with a team of people. That's how much we are dedicated to this cause. They made it a point to not just align our business, because we couldn't, to ISO, but we're one of the few firms globally that's SOC 2 Type 2 audited as a business, not passing our data center SOC 2 audits. And what my risk program officer asked me to bring up in this meeting is this type of product for evidence artifact collection needs to have mapped controls to all of our other frameworks that we're aligned with, so that I could literally pivot in your platform. And for the client that wants to see my SOC 2 Type 2 aligned controls, I could switch and still show everything in the view they're familiar with from a language perspective. If someone wants to see it from an EU GDPR subset of controls because it's a EU client, we do that today. We have to flip and show the evident artifacts from their perspective. So again, I'm probably overcommitting the product, and I hate to do that because I suspect you are successful where you're marketing. I do think there's a need like this out there. And I think there's a willingness to pay, regardless of what the cost is, especially with the larger firms. But there has to be some exchange where clients come to the table and have accepted this, and the platform has to be nimble enough to pivot between all the different control sets we now align with, especially in the AmLaw 50 and Global 50. And then lastly, and this is going to sound kind of like a sticky widget, but some of our firms, including mine, is very, very paranoid for the right reasons not to put up schematics and full policies and evidence artifacts in any exchange. I don't care if it's a client exchange. I don't care if it's GRX. I don't care if it's prevalent. I don't care who it is. We don't do it. And we push back, and we have never had an issue because a truly securely aware client understands we would never put that in wholesale somewhere. So there's a bit of a catch-22 as well, because we purposely have lockdown meetings where we show evidence, and it's very controlled. So I think from a sophisticated shopper perspective, you would run into that as well. Again, not deal breakers for the entirety of the ILTA population, but I think for a certain tranche would be an issue.
Jimmy, you mind if I take that?
No,
Not
I
at
was
all.
hoping you would.
Okay. I know you worked correctly on this.
I wrote down 45 excellent points. No, I mean, everything you say. So we have had from the beginning involved in our committees, the controls committee, the work group, and the in-house advisory board. I mean, one of the chair of the in-house advisory board comes from the defense sector, which has, the defense sector, financial services, and a few other sectors have these, and they differ, but they have this kind of.
Bill, just to make it interactive, pause on that. We've had to align now with the upcoming Nist 171 DoD mandate, right? So it's a part of the Nist 800 framework, brand new, and the controls are a whole new breed. And so you're right. If you're contracted with the federal government at a defense perspective, you need to show them the controls in that vein. It has to be in that vein. So right. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and so we all thought that, again, because we want feedback on this product, on the program, real live users, the idea was to start with that core assessment. What's the thing that all law firms, and we had them less than 10 attorneys up to 1,000+ attorneys, that all law firms have to comply with. That's the core assessment we have today. We knew from the get-go, and I think, Jim and Janae will tell you, we've talked about this often, and to the degree to which we think this group, ILTA, LegalSec as well, can really help contribute to this. We know the next stage is an advanced assessment. What we don't know, because we don't want to make these decisions alone, but we need really good feedback on where do we focus next. Do we have just unique add-on modules for financial services, another one for defense, et cetera? Or do we do an advanced assessment that kind of covers 80-20 of that next tranche? It may be that this sort of product will never get every single client that just, to some extent they've staffed bespoke, and that's where the staff are going to go, right? Or they need to. And so we'll probably never get 100%, but we do need that advice about how far to take the assessment. One reason, and then I'm going to pivot now. One reason that the Nist cybersecurity framework was really helpful, we think, is because the controls that we selected, we know how they map onto at least those other frameworks that NCF basically built around. And so if you tell me, we're looking at the information security policy, control or controls. How does that map onto ISO? It's pretty quick, pretty easy to get there. I think what you're talking about, though, would be a modification to the software. I believe Audit Board does exactly this in some of their other modules, where you basically, if you have a particular control you comply with, it can tell you, which of the Nist or ISO, et cetera, controls it maps onto. What you're asking about, and this is where, again, your feedback coming from your level on the software application is going to help us as well, because I think you almost want we think we have exactly what you want, or built around our core controls. But if you've got, and let's say you upload evidence into that, you're going to want to flip it, in the interface to say, all right, now what does that mean for the, for ISO, right? Our one of the accreditation assessments we have going on right now just got through with their ISO research, and they said this is good time because now we've got all our evidence lined up with particular controls in ISO, and we think it's going to be rather easy to load them into your NCF framework. But still, that's another load, right? And I get what you're saying on the software, and that's where we need, people who are actually in the middle of having this problem tell us what they need so we can go back and get that sort of customization and so on in the software. So I understand what you're saying there, I think, and we don't do that today, but I think that's going to be increasingly useful. And I'm just going back to yeah, and if we built it from, I think that's exactly what we want. We want this this DoD member of our in-house advisory board. We want that person to put their logo on it if we can, right? That's going to be difficult, but I think as we go forward, that's what you want. You want them to bless it and use it. So I think we're 100% on board that. That's just where we think we have to grow the product. We're certainly not there today. And I'm trying, there was one other point you made.
Loading evidence. So while you're looking for the one you're looking for, on the topic of loading evidence, it has come up with a number of firms that, and they don't talk about it generically, but that there are specific controls or specific evidence that by policy they just will not upload. There's obviously always the choice to not do that and to simply say to the client that, you'll be happy to share that in the old-fashioned way. Loading up the evidence is not a requirement. It's just a way of making it easier for firms who want to do that. So it's not required either for the self-assessment, nor for for the back-end accreditation.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I wanted to address today, because every law firm that we've worked with said we won't upload our information security policy, just won't do it. I mean, there might be a few that do, but most will not. Most are willing to do that for other controls, but as Jenny mentions, that's really just comes down to, for if you upload none, I mean, then you're left with web access or an on-site or something. That just increases the cost of the in-house client audit. But for those who want to see it, that's just a negotiation between the firm and those clients that want to see that sort of thing. And on the accreditation, we have a really streamlined approach to the accreditation, where our only goal is to basically assure the clients that when you say you are compliant with a control, that in fact, based on the evidence and conversation, you're telling the truth, essentially, right? I mean, it's just like, hey, is this person telling the truth, or are they just kind of, fattening up their survey so the score looks good? So if you get accredited, that is our goal. And, and to the extent that an assessor can review documentation remotely and not even bother you and your staff, that's one of our goals. To the extent the documentation is not in there, we have planned, a day or two where they would have to basically get online with you, maybe talk about some of the, see live some random controls, see some documentation, et cetera. But we do, as Janae is saying, we do anticipate that, but that's just a matter of, if the degree of perfection is high for some clients, and the degree of, and they've got to see this stuff, and the degree of perfection for you is high that you can't share any of it, which is really up to the firm and the client. That just makes it a little more, it drives you back into the, the on-site audit kind of model, or complete remote, WebEx type of model. We think we can support all of that to some extent, and it's just a matter of, the particular situation you're in. If that makes sense. So there's no requirement to upload evidence or anything like that. It's an option.
But to loop back around on a point, particularly for this advanced assessment that Bill's talking about, we'd love to have your input and the input of members of this group to help with making that a better way to pick off these kinds of problems. It's as if we've started with the base of the pyramid and we want to move up. We may never get to the top of the pyramid for some of those, heavily bespoke clients, but obviously the more of the pyramid that we can pick up, the more pressure it puts on people to just do what is an industry standard. Doesn't mean everybody will ever get there, but everybody will get there, but many will.
Good, great comment.
So if people wish to become involved in this conversation, Jim, Janae, Bill, how do they do it?
Call Bill.
Yeah, actually, if you want to, we'll coordinate that if they want to reach out. Actually, if they could just email me and I'll coordinate with and Bill and the advisory groups, that'd be great. And I'll provide for information, but mine is simple. It's just my last name, Merklinger @acc.com. I'll put that in the chat too for everyone.
Joy,
it's also on the website.
Yeah, Joy, I'm actually slow walking the formation of the new advanced assessment precisely because of these ILTA conversations, and I'd really like to get the people who can help us define what that is into that committee. So that's really job one for us, just to get that right. I mean, do we put HIPAA in? Do we put GDPR in? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and part of this.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, initially when the board asked to do this, said don't boil the ocean, right? And we don't want to do something that only serves a single industry, so that it was intentionally, designed this way to have those controls that could, if they don't meet all the needs of what the client's looking for, at least meet a certain segment. And I said that, I mentioned earlier, the chair of our board at the time was the CLO of a large global bank, and he thought even if we could just reduce the amount of time they spend doing these things, it may not eliminate what they do because they're a highly regulated industry, but it would still save them a lot of time and effort. Mm-hmm. So again, that's the goal is obviously we want to have something that is useful to everyone, but also recognize the reality that there are going to be certain things that every company might do that's differently. But we even have that built in. You can, as we mentioned earlier, you have the core assessments and what the score is based on, but they can also collect other data that's relevant to them. And if anything, we just want to make it so we can do it at one place and not have to have multiple systems going on.
Well, what I will do is let our G100 group know that this opportunity exists. And it may be that John or a member of his team or others would be interested in being involved in this. I know we're a little past our time. I have some flexibility. I want to make sure if anyone else has questions, they've answered them. Jim, Bill, Janae, did you cover all the material that you had hoped to cover today?
There was one. Janae, do you want to just show quickly
one more slide on the pricing?
Options?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So we have a number of options for how a law firm can choose to participate. The way we advise most firms to start is with what we call our single client option. And the single client option gives you access to all of the functionality that we've talked about this morning. Self-assessment, the central repository, the ability to do all that security project planning. And you can do that strictly for internal use, or you can share your results with a single client. So this would also be the option that you use when a company, an in-house client comes to you and says, I'm going to accept the Data Steward program in lieu of my security questionnaire this year, or we're going to use the Data Steward program as our standard. So you would get the single client license. It's a subscription of a little less than $1,500 a year. And by the way, we set that price based on having interviewed other firms like yours about, what does it cost to do these questionnaires on a regular basis, and to set that price below the level that it's costing in time and labor and partner review and the whole 9 yards. So you would do that with a single client license. And then as more clients are asking for the survey, you would simply add single client licenses, and the best economics would be to do that for a short while until you get to about 6 clients. And at 6 clients, we decided, the ACC's goal is not to have the, gouge people as they share with more clients. And so we basically cap the cost of that subscription at somewhere around 6.5 clients, and you with an unlimited client license, which is $99.95 a year, and you can then share with as many clients as you like, including turning it around and doing proactive messaging to clients saying, here's our score and we're very secure, and from now on, please accept this instead of your questionnaire. With the unlimited license, you also do have the option to pursue that ACC accreditation that I talked about. ACC accreditation is a relationship with that independent assessor, and so they set their own prices. But it's a 4-day consult, as I mentioned, and completely digitally. And it's 4 days for the assessor, only about a day for you. And basically what they do is they go through your self-assessment, they validate the responses, they look at evidence either in the system, or if you can't provide it in the system, then it's probably going to take a little more of your time, but you can provide it obviously in the old-fashioned way via Zoom or a workspace. And if you meet the minimum ACC designated standards that were set by the working committee, you're designated as ACC accredited. And we're putting up a new special section on the ACC website, as well as the ACCdatasteward.com website, where we will be listing people who want to be listed who have achieved ACC accreditation, so that ACC members who are interested in adding firms to their panel can go there and look and see, oh, I don't need to, do a security assessment for this person as I bring them on board. They're already been ACC accredited. Accreditation is a once every 3-year process. And you maintain that accreditation for 3 years and then need to renew it. So, and our goal, by the way, is not, this is not the same thing, obviously, as an ISO accreditation. The primary goal of ACC accreditation is to assure people that you've met that ACC standard, and that we have validated that the answers in your self-assessment have been reviewed by an independent third party. It's a validation of your responses. So that's how you get started.
Yep. And one other point is, one of the other committees we're forming right now would be an assessor committee to set the standards for, because eventually the assessors will just be independent third parties that you retain, but we want them ACC accredited, people who have certain credentials and so on. So we're developing those standards now. And I would expect that group of people to also be assisting clients if clients want to do audits. It's kind of a place to outsource that kind of work. Today we have 2 interim assessors that we've lined up. One was the assessor at the White House, so really credible, a couple of credible people to line up. But eventually this will all be standards based, who's ACC accredited as an assessor.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Bill. And I'm assuming that if someone goes for the ACC accreditation, one way to address this evidence issue might be that evidence could be tagged in the system as having already been reviewed by the ACC assessor. That might be a value add.
Right. Good point.
Yeah, thinking about it. So, well, I thank you very much. I thank everyone for participating, for your great questions. Bill, Janae, Jim, we're going to come back to you with some folks who are very interested in helping. And, I think this was a great conversation. I will make the recording available to RG100 firms. And thank you, thank you for a great conversation, great presentation. I hope everybody found value in it.
Yeah,
Terrific. Just
Joy,
one last
thank you.
thing. If there's any additional questions after the call, you can always reach us through the ACCdatasteward.com website. You send an email to info at ACCdatasteward.com.
Or Jim, and his email's in there. Right?
Yeah, or you
absolutely.
can just call Jim.
It's not a problem at all. And also, I know we didn't go through it, but if anyone wants an individual demonstration of that DSP exchange, please just email me. We'll set that up for you. And that's a lot more in depth than what we were covering today. But thank you again, Joy. And Joy, thank you again for inviting us to speak with your members.
Yep, it was great meeting you all.
This is really important. And the better we can, these are the kinds of things that we can and should collaborate on, because it helps everybody. It's good for everyone.
This was
So-
fantastic. Thank you so much for entertaining my thoughts on this, and I look forward to working with you all.
No, well, thank you for sharing them, but they're all very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Have a good rest of your day.
You
Bye.
bet. Stay warm.
Bye-bye. Yeah, absolutely.